So I'm here with Dickey, also known as Dikaiopolis 2. And so he's working on this narrative in graph form, and he has this theory about the concept of it on his website, where he talks about what he calls the glass bead gamification of literature. And
Yes.
and so we're going to talk a bit about why write in graphs, why read in graphs, why use Rome for fiction in this manner, and so similar ideas. I guess to start, can you talk a bit about your idea of the sort of glass bead gamification, and so why write in this sort of manner?
Yeah, definitely. I would love to. And thank you so much for having me on and giving me this opportunity to talk about it. That's awesome. And I'm really, really happy to be here. So basically, the way I see it is that people. All right, so I'll start with on my side of things, and I started backwards in my life and in my experience as a writer. Um, Obviously, I was a reader before that, but sort of coming to this, I struggled with writing. I greatly enjoyed doing it. There was some impetus to do it. Blah blah blah. I guess that's a really boring story, but at the end of the day, I had a novel that I was really, um, I don't know what you can say. I dedicated quite a bit of hours to it, quite a bit of my life to it, and nobody nobody cares about that right now, nor should they, because tons of people have that. And you go into the world holding, feeling quite good about yourself, holding this manuscript, and then you're saying, okay, this is it, everybody. It's done, and everybody's got to see this. And you're like, okay, so what's the next step? I've done this already, and you're looking, okay, now I need to get an agent, now I need to go to a publisher. And me personally, you're looking on these websites and you're seeing the end goal of, you're seeing all of the steps that you have to go through and all of the kinds of people that you have to impress, and you're seeing the end result of this, and you're going to wind up with some sort of stereotypical cover on like a little website that nobody goes on. Even if this was like in the bargain bin of a grocery store, that is better, because at least people are walking by this grocery store and seeing these books. But on this random publisher's website, and this is where the book is going to end up, I just decided, I was disillusioned with the whole thing, and that sort of threw me down a a good sort of years long process of thinking, like, so why did I even write this in the first place? Right? What is the point of writing at all? I'm an egomaniac. I think that I have it all figured out. This was a waste of my time, and I'm not going to try to waste anybody else's time reading this book. And I was there for a while, and then I read something, the final chapter of the Trivium by Sister Miriam Joseph, and she just laid it out, the very Aristotelian point of view about catharsis and all these things that I had known and seen, but never at that moment it sort of spoke to me and said, this is the role, this is the critical role that a writer and a storyteller plays. And once you accept that as someone who has written a novel or a narrative, a story, then it's incumbent on you to tell people that story. And now you go back to square one and you think, okay, so how am I going to tell people this story? And now finally, after way too many minutes of me talking, you wind up on the other side and you're saying, where do I meet the readers? Where are the readers? I think this story is important. Where are the readers? And yeah, they're not buying novels. Not, I mean, people do, and they should, and more people should. But the book at this point is it's becoming more and more historical. Maybe it's simply not where people read. And so, where do people read? and why do people read in those places, and spend enough time thinking about it, spend enough time going on these little searches around what people are up to, and I think you wind up with somewhere that I wound up.
Right.
Sorry
Yeah.
if that was way too long.
No, but you have a good concise comment on this sort of point um, on your website. Actually, I really liked where you see you write, readers have come of age in a time of unprecedented information availability, presented in historically unique ways. And so you ask, am I the only one who has read a chain email, judged a person by their away status, attempted to reflect changing perceptions of myself via static profiles or creations, mistook a person for their static profile or curations, crowded around a friend's desktop to stumble upon through websites,
Mhm.
scrolled for hours down imager dumps, hovered over replies to read responses to a post, followed a meme to its origins, right-clicked a name or a place or idea and opened it in Wikipedia's page in a new tab. This is what it means to read today, who is writing for these readers and how. So I thought that was very sort of concise and to the point to what you're sort of leading into now.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I should have just said that exactly
Oh no,
instead of
no,
that
no,
whole roundabout way. Yeah.
no, no.
Eh,
I like the backstory, but I'm saying like the last like couple sentences of what you were leading into. I wanted to get this in here because I thought this is very astute.
Well, thank you. And yeah, and that's pretty much it. And it's how people are reading, and books are fantastic, and I certainly love novels. Um, we've had novels, you certainly know better than I do, the development of novels and what came before novels. And to think that we need to stay on novels, despite the fact that it's it's not working in a lot of ways, that's yeah, I don't think that's a good long-term plan. And I think that there's and now I really do think that a tool such as Rome is enabling new forms of literature. And I think it's incumbent upon authors and writers and storytellers to engage fully with these, and not for our own ego's sake, and not for neat little novelties sake, but for engaging readers and giving readers a sense of completion. And that's what I'm really trying to do with this.
Right, and so in that list I was reading, right, you have all these different sort of website designs and social media structures and stuff. But you're writing in particular through Rome Research's system. Can you explain a bit about how that's sort of structured and what that looks like?
Yeah, great. So here we are. This is a graph. It's a nice theme. I should give credit to who it is. This is my private one. This is the public one. And the defining characteristic, I guess, of this is the auto-populating index pages. So this is the cover page, and this is sort of not a natural thing for Rome. It should not be hierarchical, but we're figuring all that stuff out. So this is the graph overview. This is the highest level. This is the map of it. And here's the page that we were just on. These are all the parts of the story, the different acts, should be acts. You come over here, and this is part one. And then we go to a chapter. And these are the, in brackets, these are the terms that you click on. Let's get a good one. So possible places, great. And you can see here, this is the auto-populated index of this term, impossible places. And this is something that I put in myself, but these linked references are everywhere in the story that I have tagged impossible places. And then there's also, if I don't link anything, not in this case, it will appear there. Right,
Right.
and
So,
so that's it. Those are the three levels, right? Of the index, um, the content itself, the story itself, and then the high level overview.
right. So if you just say impossible places without doing anything, it'll come up under unlinked. But what you're doing with these is you're putting it in these brackets, right?
Yep, precisely. Yep, exactly. And and so this is really, and this is, I'm very much still figuring out how this is going to work and how it's going to work well, and how to make this. I'm thinking, it's not meta literature. I love, Italo Calvino is like my greatest, one of my greatest inspirations and influences, and one of my favorite authors. Um, and but this is not that. This is not supposed to be self-referential. This is not supposed to be um, talking about the work itself. This is supposed to be above the work and above the story, above the narrative, but still very much connected to it, and there just to guide the reader and to give them that sense of what everyone is already used to, right? Give them that sense of opening up a Wikipedia tab and learning a little bit more about whatever they happen to be reading, and that's trying to meet the reader where they are.
Right. And so getting back to the idea of why someone would read this, right? So say you
Mhm.
have so you say meeting the readers where they are, but so say you have someone who's, they're on social media and they're in this feed and they're going off into like Wikipedia and the sort of web of hyperlinks there, and they're going through these image dumps and all of these things. So what is the value of literature that someone might want to sort of switch over and read this whole graph novel?
Right, and so that's what I was trying to get at in the thread in the failed thread. And this is something that I need to harp on more. I need to, in my own mind, I need to. Uh, you, Timothy, are a PhD in literature, right? And so you know the value of literature, and in the most basic sense, it's a sense of release. It's a sense of expanding yourself, but getting to know yourself better, of making your life more complex but more harmonious through this process uh, that the storyteller, that the author guides you through. And people don't know this anymore. This has been a big trick that we have fallen for. That we think that if we just read 1,000 self-help books, that we're going to be Superman and the next whatever CEO, or the next whatever normal people want to be, great rich person, Bitcoin millionaire, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, and we've totally lost sight of the fact that literature is something so deeply ingrained in us, and language, yeah, has such a powerful effect on us when used this way. We've totally cut off this half of language, and I think, the honestly, like, the only way can go is up, and the tools now, such as Rome Research, that are normalizing, this sort of long form sharing of work. This is all setting the stage for a very, for a renewed interest in something like this. And that's how it's going to happen. I mean, the phrase I use is an impossible itch that you can't scratch. And that's all that Twitter feeds you. And that's all that, less directly, Wikipedia feeds you. Certainly, I know people used to call me Dickey Wiki because I just loved Wikipedia so much. But guess what? It does nothing for you. Just going on Wikipedia all the time. Literature, on the other hand, does something for you. And I think that, it's our job to show people that and to bring people to that. And this is a tool. This is one of the first tools that I've seen that can really do that in an appropriate way.
Right. So I was also wondering um, what sort of familiarity you have, if any, with like early hypertext fiction and such.
Yeah, not not as much as I should. Maybe I saw that. Yeah, you had asked me that, and I thought deeply about it. And the best example I could think of, and the first real interaction I had, was GeoCities and like forums where we role played to be like Jedi Knights or Harry Potter or something like that. And that, I don't know if that counts at all as what you're working towards. In university, I think a professor shared with us something inspired by Borges that was online. But yeah, I'm not well versed in that world, to be honest.
Okay, yeah. So because there is some back through like the early to sort of mid late 90s, right? There's people working on somewhat formally similar things where you have um, these sort of non-linear narratives where you have certain words link out to different pages. Um, Not typically the same sort of structure where you have these index pages, but it would be like you would have, you know, one page and then the word aesthetic there would link to like some one other specific page rather than this whole index and things like that. And so you would have this nonlinear narrative. And one of the things with that um, is typically because it was nonlinear, you would have in some cases this challenge of closure. Narrative closure is one
Mm.
of the sort of issues that comes up in sort of the sort of theory around this through writers like G. Douglas and so because it's like when do you know that you're done reading?
Mm.
But so you're talking a lot about this idea of the value of catharsis and such, and so you have your sections sort of numbered. And so is your vision for this project something where someone can start reading on say this page or wherever and eventually just sort of, you know, be done like I read the novel, and it's formally different from most typical print novels, but you're imagining something that is like it has a sort of beginning and end, right?
Yeah, very much. I very much, and that is, I know that's exactly the problem that you mentioned. Would be the counter argument to not do that and to not abandon um, form, right? To not abandon plot, because I really do think that the whole, that there's, while, earlier I was saying that I think the novel is sort of becoming more and more historical. I don't think that the the you know a plot structure is becoming more historical. I don't see how one could get the benefits of literature without that. But I mean, you're obviously much better, in a much better position to comment on that than I would be.
And I thought the project is interesting. Can you show a bit? I mean, so what exactly? So if there is this sort of beginning, end, and such, what is a reader gain from clicking into something like Impossible Places
Sure.
rather
Yeah.
than
Well,
just
and yeah, right. So that's the whole big question. Exactly. And that's and that that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm really trying hard to figure out now. And I've written before that I think the first master of this will be the person who can craft a narrative above the narrative, and who can use those index pages to greater effect somehow. Um, right now, what I think, for example, something that I've seen as promising is um, double linking. So, for example, Impossible Places and The Suburbs. These are two. Where did it go? These are two terms that are coming up a few times, and then a character says it. Here it is. There are a lot of non-places in the suburbs, and this creates its own term. So now this term has a lot of non-places in the suburbs, and this is something that I just happened to see on Twitter. Someone retweeted it. Igen Robot retweeted it, and I thought it was perfect, and I just put it in here because I wanted to experiment with this. And so this is the line, and now this is this guy. He's talking about suburban realism or blah, blah, blah. And then all these people are pointing to this guy and this image. And this belongs to these two Twitter accounts. And that, I think, is one possibility and one direction to go in, is use this to connect this to reality, and or maybe I don't know, I'm not so sure of this term that you used, the hyper reality of our modern life, where everything is on screens and everything is always being represented again and again or created out of nothing. And we can use this literature then to sort of bring that into a story. And this is sort of answering at the same time that sort of impossible itch problem of Twitter, where now you're structuring this information, you're structuring this stimulus that's always present and always sort of making you want more and more, making you want these impossible things. And if you work them into a story, I think that can be very nice for a reader.
Right. Yeah. So if you could see on the top of this page right here, there's this open space, click here to start writing. And so the index isn't just bringing these connective threads together of every reference of this point, but it's also that you can create the space to add in additional pages of writing sort of outside of and above the sort of linear narrative.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And this is what I was trying to show you earlier was, so here it is. This is when I wrote this, and so I'm totally cheating this time around. This is, like I said, I wrote this as a typical novel, as a novel. And now I'm trying to do a greater than one-to-one translation of it to this form. And so I'm cheating, I'm going back and I'm changing things as I'm learning. And this is an example of exactly what you just said. So here is aesthetic and music videos from the early 2010s. And as I just did with this other one, I put them together. And here I put this sort of, whatever you want to call it, a think piece, if we're being honest with ourselves, about the music videos from the early 2010s. And this is something that the character was obsessed with, that acted as a plot device, that the character was, got sucked into this world and spent a summer just staring at these screens, and his life deteriorated around him as he's watching these, pop music videos. And then in this library scene, he has a burst of inspiration and he bangs out this philippic that he calls it. And so instead of just making that a chapter, I make that, a combination of the aesthetic and the music video from the early 2010s. Right. So, and this is an instance of using the index page as more than just a auto-populated list of references.
Right. And so lastly, to sort of get a bit into like the specifics of this like current creative project. So from what I was reading with the Twitter thread you posted earlier, I noticed you have this idea about, sort of people kind of idling around on Twitter, but it's also this sort of place in which people sort of become characters and things like that. But what I noticed with the sort of beginning, the chapter 1, part 1 of the story is you have this character who's, kind of idling around, messages popping up on his phone, people sitting around, and then gets this sort of like invite in that sort of sets off events. But this was, there's the formal challenge of, we have readers who are, judging away statuses, scrolling around, following information through different pages and all of that. But then there's also, the on the narrative level, the way in which those things don't come up either. And so that was something that I was posting about over the summer, this challenge where you have a lot of very skilled writers who are not just, it's not that they're not just experimenting formally with the screen, but that they will sort of actively avoid writing about people with computers and smartphones and all of this because of various sort of challenges it imposes to narrative, one of which being the way it sort of collapses time a bit, because what would otherwise be this long story. So that there's this short Toby Lit piece in Granta that I really like, that gives this sort of concise view where he gives this example that with the Odyssey by Homer, right? If Odysseus could just call home and be like, "Oh, by the way, I'm alive. I'll be back whenever I finish up all of this chaos," you wouldn't really have the same narrative where you start with this tension of the suitors, and he Odysseus has to get home. If you could just call home, right, the narrative would collapse because you wouldn't have the tension anymore. So this, I think what's interesting with the sort of linking structure and the index and the sort of top level stuff is I think it's maybe a little more friendly toward that sort of narrative you're writing, where people are just sort of, they have phones and there's notifications popping up everywhere and stuff. Is you can sort of move around and sort of pause as much as you need, which I think will sort of open up a lot of those sort of possibilities around the sort of very intensive time of like hypermedia and all of that sort of might otherwise be tricky to really tell a compelling narrative with in a sort of just traditional page by page print narrative.
Interesting. Yeah, I watched. I really enjoyed your video with the Seinfeld reference, and you mentioned that same piece in it. And yeah, it's that's interesting. That's great. I think that I set out on this piece in this novel to really to make something very contemporary, very current, and specifically Bildungsroman. I think it's something that's so overlooked now. I mean, could you point to one in the last 10 years, new, that you think really captures the nature of coming of age and making peace with yourself, making peace with society?
I mean, I don't know. There's some, but I do have some concerns about things like there seems to be there's so much going on in terms of growing up just with all of this technology and growing up, particularly in more recent years, the way that schooling has become much more sort of technologized as well. All of these things that there's a few novels I could think of, so like Ruth Ozecki's A Tale for the Time Being, I think does a sort of good job of capturing this sort of like young person and in sort of school age, growing up with technology and trying to sort of come to terms with certain things. But there is definitely a lot that I think is unexplored about, the sort of serious implications of coming of age and with everything going on right now. One challenge might be how fast it changes or things like of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. And and then you get the fact that there very much is at least in, I don't know about in my experience, but in my observation, there's very much a delayed, it's a delayed coming of age. And so you have people really not coming to terms with themselves until after they graduate university. Um, then the unique set of challenges that you're trying to figure out who you are while there's a lot more pressure to sort of get up and go. And then you add the additional layer of trying to create something meaningful, trying to create this, sort of representation or an artifact of yourself at the same time, and what all of that means. And you know, yeah, I for a long time, and I believe the next big piece of writing that I'll produce, it will not be contemporary. And for a long time, I avoided it. I don't know if for reasons of difficulty or uncertainty of how to represent it, but I just didn't like it. I thought it was prettier. I thought it was cooler to go back into the, past, or, an imagined past. And I think I'll go back to there eventually. Reading, but it was reading Confederacy of Dunces that actually snapped me out of that totally. That John Kennedy Toole just represented his contemporary reality with such, I don't even know what to call it. It was like reading a fantasy story set in reality, and I thought it was the coolest thing, and it totally made me realize that I should focus on representing, what I considered ugly and unaesthetic contemporary world in a way that gives meaning to it, and that is what I set out to do. Whether or not I achieved it is not for me to say, right? It's for the readers to say. And I'm very comfortable with 99% of the people who read this not liking it or being, put off by it or something like that, as long as, it's for a very specific small group of people, not so different from myself. And if some of those people like it, then great, then I've done my job.
Right, yeah. And so there's the content level I think is interesting, but then also to bring it back a bit, right, there's this formal
Mm.
level where you write a lot about this idea of, writing for the screens and the sort of future of, like, really making use of that. And so if you look at sort of the wider electronic literature sort of world, that there's various other experiments with that, but you have this other line I liked where you comment that it's as if none dare carve Gilgamesh into clay tablets because tablets are for grain receipts. And so you have, basically this moment where people are using and reading and writing on these screens in all sorts of these ways. People are using Rome research extensively, at least some people, but that, this challenge, this impetus that, to write literary work into this form. And so you've set up a sort of very interesting thing. And so, you can follow along the project via email on your website, Dikaiopolis2.com. And I'll put a link
Yes.
below, but so people can check that out. It's sort of shaping up quite interesting. And so thank you for coming on.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, thank you so much for talking.